Have you ever felt completely dirty inside? I'm not talking about that dirt that comes out with a shower. I'm talking about that stain on the soul that seems impossible to clean. That guilt that haunts you when you close your eyes at night. That shame that makes you want to hide from the world. Today I'm going to tell you the story of a man who knew this dirt better than anyone. A man who has dived into the deepest mud pit that life can offer. But I'll also tell you about a source so powerful that it has managed to cleanse even the deepest stains of your soul. This is the story of Samuel Blackwood, a man who discovered that no matter how stained his heart is, there is a fountain that can make it whiter than snow. The Los Angeles sun was setting in shades of orange and red over the skyline of skyscrapers when Samuel Blackwood signed the last document of the day. His fingers, adorned by a solid gold ring bearing the Blackwood Technologies crest, glided elegantly over the paper. The Mont Blanc pen, a gift from his father on the day he took over the company, left his impeccable signature, a mark of authority that had become his personal symbol in the corporate world. "Is that all for today, Mr. Blackwood?" asked Jennifer, his executive assistant for more than a decade. She was standing in the doorway, spotless in her Armani suit, clutching an Italian leather briefcase that cost more than the monthly salary of many of the employees on the lower floors. "Yes, Jennifer, you can go home. Say hello to Mark and the kids for me." Samuel smiled. That smile that appeared in business magazines and that inspired confidence in investors and shareholders. A smile that had become as natural as breathing, even when it reflected absolutely nothing of what she felt inside. When Jennifer closed the door, the smile disappeared instantly. Samuel spun his leather chair to take in the panoramic view from the 40th floor. Los Angeles stretched out before him like a carpet of twinkling lights, each representing lives, dreams, stories, all as far away from him as the stars. He opened the lower drawer of his desk, the one he kept locked with a key that he always carried with him. From inside, he removed a small bottle of 30-year-old Scotch whiskey and a crystal glass. There was no need to hide the drink. He was the CEO, after all. But there was something about the clandestinity of the act that attracted him. Like so many other things in his life, it was a secret. A small act of rebellion against what? He himself did not know more. The whiskey came down burning his throat, a familiar fire that, for a brief moment, overshadowed the constant chill he felt in his chest. Samuel looked at his watch, a Patek Philippe that had cost more than most people made in a year. 7:43 p.m. Catherine would be waiting, or maybe not. In recent months, she seemed more and more distant, as if she already knew, somehow, that something was wrong. Samuel picked up his phone and checked the offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. The last deposit had been successfully made. Another $2.7 million embezzled from the company's investment funds, transferred through a complex web of shell companies that he had painstakingly created over the years. The current balance was just over $42 million, a hidden fortune, an escape plan that he continued to feed, even without knowing exactly what he was running from. It wasn't like he needed the money. His official salary as CEO was more than generous. The Malibu mansion, the luxury cars, the first-class travel, all of that he could legitimately have. But there was something about the act of deception, of manipulating the system, that gave him a sense of power that no legitimate acquisition had ever provided. Samuel closed the banking app and opened the photo gallery. He swiped until he found the image he was looking for. Him, Catherine, Emily, and Michael on the beach in Maui last Christmas. All smiling, tanned, the perfect image of the successful American family. Emily, at the age of 16, already showed her mother's classic beauty. Michael, at 14, had the athletic build that promised a career in college basketball, a perfect family, a perfect life, a perfect lie. Samuel felt that familiar sensation growing in his chest, a tightness, a pressure that sometimes woke him up in the middle of the night, panting and sweating. His therapist called it anxiety. Her doctor had suggested that it could be the beginning of heart problems and had recommended tests. But Samuel knew what it really was. It was guilt. a guilt that grew with each bank transfer, with each falsified report, with each look in the confident eyes of his investors while promising them returns he knew they would never deliver. A guilt that accumulated like an invisible stain on his soul, slowly spreading, contaminating every aspect of his life. He finished the whiskey and put the bottle away. He adjusted his Hermes tie, took the Brioni jacket from the clothes rack and headed for the private elevator. On the way to the parking lot, he greeted the night security guard with a friendly wave and a $100 bill. His Friday ritual. Buy something beautiful for your daughter, Carlos. I heard her birthday is coming up. Carlos smiled gratefully. You have a good memory, Mr. Blackwood. She turns 10 next week. Children grow up too fast, Samuel said, feeling a pang of genuine remorse. Enjoy every moment. In the underground parking lot, his Aston Martin waited, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Samuel slid onto the leather seat, smelling the familiar smell of luxury and privilege. He started the engine, letting the powerful rumble fill his ears for a moment before leaving. Los Angeles traffic was surprisingly light for a Friday night. In less than 40 minutes, Samuel was walking through the security gates of his gated community in Malibu. The houses here weren't just residences. They were status, statements, monuments to success. His, a 1,200-square-foot contemporary mansion overlooking the ocean, was one of the most impressive. As he entered the long circular driveway, Samuel noticed that Catherine's car was not there. Only Emily's BMW was parked in the four-car garage. He felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief for not having to maintain the facade of a happy husband for a few more hours. Disappointment because, after all, he missed the time when Catherine was anxiously waiting for him at home. The house was quiet when he entered. Only the soothing sound of the ambient sound system playing some jazz playlist that the intelligence system automatically selected when it detected its arrival. Samuel left his briefcase and jacket on the marble console in the entrance hall and went to the kitchen, where he found a note on the center island. I took Michael to basketball camp in San Diego. We returned Sunday night. There's food in the fridge. Emily is studying for her final exams. Please don't disturb her. See, not even a with love or longing. Only practical information, such as a business memo. Samuel crumpled the note and threw it in the stainless steel bin. He opened the Sub-Zero refrigerator, contemplating its well-stocked interior without actually seeing anything. I wasn't hungry. I hadn't been hungry for weeks, actually. He had lost almost 5 pounds, something his personal trainer had praised, attributing to the new exercise routine Samuel pretended to follow. Instead of food, he grabbed a bottle of wine, a 2010 Opus One, one of hundreds in his climate-controlled wine cellar. He opened it with the electric opener and poured a generous bowl. The first sip was like a hug from an old friend, comforting, familiar, numb. Samuel wandered through the empty house, his footsteps echoing off the Italian marble floor. He went through the formal living room, with its designer sofas that no one really used, through the works of contemporary art acquired more as investments than for aesthetic appreciation. He stopped in front of one in particular, a large abstract canvas that had cost $1.2 million at a Sotheby's auction. Patches of red and black that supposedly represented the tumult of the modern human condition, according to the catalog. Samuel laughed bitterly. The artist had no idea of the real turmoil, the real chaos that existed beneath the polished surface of men like himself. He continued his journey until he reached Emily's office. The door was ajar and he could see his daughter hunched over books and notebooks, headphones isolating her from the world. For a moment he just watched, feeling a wave of love and guilt so intense that it almost made him stagger. Emily was brilliant. First in class, captain of the debate team, volunteering at 3 different charitable organizations. She had inherited Samuel's intelligence and determination, but also Catherine's compassion and integrity, a combination that made her infinitely better than he would ever be. Samuel almost knocked on the door, almost came in to ask about her day, to offer help with her studies, or just to be close to her, but something stopped him. A sudden, irrational fear that she might look into his eyes and see, really see, who he was on the inside. to see the stain that grew on his soul. Instead, he quietly retreated and headed to his own office at the end of the hall. There, he sat down in his leather armchair and turned on the computer. He checked the account again in the Cayman Islands like an addict checking his drug. The numbers were there, unchanged since the last time he had looked, less than an hour ago. Still, there was something comforting about the concreteness of those digits. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed unknown. Normally, Samuel wouldn't answer, but something, intuition perhaps, or simply the boredom of a lonely night, made him accept the call. "Samuel Blackwood," he answered, his voice automatically taking on the confident, authoritative tone he used for business. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a voice he didn't immediately recognize. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Andrew Merrick of the Securities and Exchange Commission." Samuel felt his heart race, but he kept his voice steady. "Mr. Merrick, how can I help you on a Friday night? I apologize for the time, Mr. Blackwood, but we are conducting a preliminary investigation into some discrepancies in Blackwood Technology's financial reports for the past few quarters." Samuel took a sip of wine, buying time as his mind quickly processed the implications. The CVM, research, discrepancies, words he had feared for 3 years since he had started his scheme. "Discrepancies?" he repeated, his voice a study in innocent confusion. "What kind of discrepancies?" "I'd rather not discuss the details over the phone, Mr. Blackwood. We would like to schedule a meeting for next week. Would Monday be convenient?" "Of course," Samuel replied automatically. "My assistant can organize this. Send us an email with your availability." "I will do it. Have a nice weekend, Mr. Blackwood." The call ended, and Samuel stared at the phone in his hand. His palm was sweaty, and he could feel his pulse hammering at his temples. The CVM was investigating. That could mean a lot of things. Maybe just a routine check. Maybe something related to one of the company's legitimate investments. Or maybe they had. Samuel finished the wine in a single sip and poured himself another, pouring some on the table due to his trembling hands. He needed to think. He needed a plan. He opened his email and began writing to his contact in the Cayman Islands, requesting that a portion of the funds be transferred to a secondary account in Switzerland. Just a precaution, just to be safe. As he typed, Samuel felt that familiar pressure in his chest grow, expand until he could barely breathe. He loosened. His tie unbuttoned the collar of his shirt. The air conditioning was working perfectly, keeping the house at the exact 22 degrees he preferred. But Samuel felt like he was suffocating. He stood up abruptly, knocking over the wine glass. The dark red liquid spread across the white Persian carpet, a rapidly expanding stain absorbed by the delicate fibers. Samuel watched, mesmerized, as the red spread, seeping deeper and deeper into the fabric, like the guilt in your soul. At that moment, staring at the stain of wine ruining the $50,000 carpet, Samuel Blackwood had one absolute certainty. His carefully constructed world was about to fall apart. The invisible stain he had been carrying for so long was about to become visible for all to see, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. The next morning, Samuel woke up with a throbbing headache, the result of the bottle of wine that had finished on his own. He was in his office, having fallen asleep in his armchair. The computer was still on, the screen showing the email he had sent to his contact in the Cayman Islands. He stood up, feeling each of his 45 years in his sore back and stiff joints. In the bathroom adjacent to the office, Samuel stared at his reflection in the mirror. Deep, dark circles marked his eyes, and a day-old gray beard shadowed his normally clean-shaven face. He looked old, tired, scared. "Control yourself," he muttered to his reflection. "You're Samuel Blackwood. You built an empire from nothing. You can handle it." He took a hot shower, shaved meticulously, and donned casual designer clothes. Ralph Lauren linen pants, Loro Piana cotton shirt. Saturday was golf day at Riviera Country Club, where he had been a member since Blackwood Technologies had made its IPO 8 years ago. Maintaining the routine was crucial. Appearances, always appearances. On the way to the kitchen, Samuel stopped in front of Emily's office. The door was open, but the room was empty. He checked his watch. 8:37 a.m. Emily had probably gone out for her morning run on the beach, a habit she maintained religiously regardless of the weather or season. In the kitchen, Samuel found a note from Emily on the fridge. "I went for a run, then I'm going to the library. Don't wait for me for dinner. Jess's graduation party. I love you, Dad." Those last two words, "I love you, Dad," hit Samuel like a punch in the gut. When was the last time he had told Emily that he loved her? When was the last time you really talked, not just about grades or extracurricular activities, but about things that mattered? Samuel brewed an espresso in the $5,000 Italian machine he rarely used. Catherine usually took care of that, and sat down on the kitchen island. Your phone vibrated with a notification. An email from Andrew Merrick from CVM, confirming a meeting for Monday at 10 a.m. The reality of the situation has returned with a vengeance. Samuel opened his laptop and began reviewing the company's financial reports for the past few quarters, trying to understand exactly what the CVM might have found. He had been careful, extremely careful. The transfers were small enough not to arouse immediate suspicion, disguised as legitimate consulting expenses for companies that existed only on paper. But there was always the possibility of a mistake, of a pattern that he had not noticed. Or maybe someone had spoken, someone on the finance team who had noticed something strange. Or maybe the phone rang again. This time it was Richard Keller, CFO of Blackwood Technologies and a longtime friend of Samuel's. "Rich," Samuel answered, keeping his voice casual. "What happened? I thought I was in Tahiti with Diane." "I am," Richard replied, his voice strained even across the international connection. "Samuel, I just received an email from the CVM. They want to meet me on Monday." Samuel felt his stomach sink. "Yes, they contacted me too. Probably just a routine check." "It doesn't seem routine, Sam. They specifically mentioned the consulting accounts from Asia, the ones you asked me to approve without asking too many questions." There was a heavy silence. Samuel could hear the distant sound of waves crashing on the other end of the line. Richard was probably on his balcony overlooking the ocean, the tropical paradise in complete contrast to the storm brewing in their professional lives. "Rich, don't worry about it," Samuel said, injecting confidence into his voice. "I will deal with the CVM. Just tell them that all expenses have been approved by me and that you trusted my judgment," which is true. "Sam," Richard's voice was filled with worry and something else. Suspicious, perhaps. "Is there something you're not telling me?" "Of course not," Samuel replied quickly. Too fast. "Look, enjoy your vacation. Don't let government bureaucracy ruin your time with Diane. We'll talk when you get back." After hanging up, Samuel remained motionless for several minutes, staring at the glass wall that offered a panoramic view of the Pacific. The ocean was calm today, a vast blue carpet stretching to the horizon. So peaceful, so permanent, so different from the storm that roared inside him. Richard knew, maybe not the details, but he was suspicious. And if the SEC was asking specifically about Asian consulting accounts, the shell companies Samuel had set up to funnel funds, then they knew too, or they were very close to finding out. Samuel canceled his golf plans with a quick message to his usual partners, an apology about a pressing business problem, something no one would question coming from the workaholic CEO of Blackwood Technologies. Instead, he spent the day in his office reviewing documents, deleting emails, desperately trying to cover his tracks. Around 5 p.m., exhausted and with his eyes burning, Samuel finally admitted to himself what his subconscious had known since Merrick's call. It was too late. If the CVM was investigating the consulting accounts, they already had enough evidence. They already knew. His empire was about to crumble. Samuel closed his laptop and walked to the wine cellar in the basement. He went through the expensive Bordeaux and Burgundies, the vintage champagnes, the aged Barolos. At the back of the cellar, behind a false wall that he had secretly installed, was a safe. He typed in the combination, Emily's date of birth, something no one would associate with the cold and calculating Samuel Blackwood, and the door opened. Inside were documents, passports with different names, all with his photo, corresponding credit cards, property deeds in countries without extradition treaties with the United States, gold bars, and a substantial amount in various foreign currencies. Their escape plan, meticulously prepared over the years. Samuel looked at the contents of the safe, feeling a mixture of relief and despair. He could disappear. He could be on another continent before the CVM issued a warrant. He could live comfortably for the rest of his life with the money he had hidden, but that would mean abandoning everything. Not just the company, the mansion, the cars, but Emily, Michael, even Catherine, despite the distance between them. It would mean confirming his guilt. It would mean that the stain on his soul had finally consumed everything. Samuel closed the safe without taking anything and went back upstairs. In the living room, he poured himself a whiskey. Not the expensive scotch this time, but bourbon, strong and rough. He needed the burning, the physical pain to distract him from the agony in his mind. The sun was setting again, painting the sky with the same shades of orange and red that had marked the beginning of this downward spiral 24 hours ago. Samuel watched the spectacle through the floor-to-ceiling windows, wondering how many more of these sunsets he would see as a free man. His phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. It was an unknown number, but different from the night before. For a moment, Samuel considered not answering. But what difference would it make now? Blackwood, he answered, his voice hoarse from whiskey and exhaustion. Mr. Blackwood, this is FBI Special Agent David Torres. The voice was professional, emotionless. I am calling to inform you that we will be at your office at Blackwood Technologies on Monday morning with a search warrant related to an investigation into financial fraud and tax evasion. Samuel's world seemed to stop. The FBI, not only the CVM, but the FBI. This meant that it was not just a civil investigation, but a criminal one. It meant that they had substantial evidence. It meant imprisonment. I see, he managed to say, his voice surprisingly calm. I'll be there. We strongly recommend that you have legal representation present, Torres continued. And Mr. Blackwood, I must caution you not to destroy or alter any electronic documents or records. That would constitute obstruction of justice, a separate charge. Of course, Samuel replied automatically. Thanks for the warning. The call ended, and Samuel dropped the phone on the couch next to him. That was it. The end. Monday, the FBI would be in his office, collecting evidence that would send him to prison. The Blackwood Empire, built over 2 decades of relentless work, genuine innovation, and, in recent years, calculated fraud, would crumble like a house of cards. Samuel finished the bourbon and poured himself another. His mind, normally agile and strategic, seemed numb. He should call his lawyer. He should prepare a statement for the press. He should run away. Now, while he still had a chance. The thought crystallized in his mind with astonishing clarity. He could take the private jet, fly to Mexico, then to a country without extradition. He could access his offshore accounts, live comfortably for the rest of his life. But then the image of Emily popped into his mind. Emily, reading in the newspapers that her father was a fugitive, a criminal. Emily, having to face the looks, the whispers, the shame. Emily, whose respect meant more to Samuel than any amount of money ever could. And it was then that Samuel Blackwood made the hardest and, paradoxically, easiest decision of his life. He would not run away. He would face the consequences of his actions. He would admit the existence of the stain he had carried for so long, the stain that had now grown so large that it could no longer be hidden. On Monday, he would be in his office when the FBI arrived. He would cooperate. He would confess. And then, maybe, just maybe, he could begin to clean the stain that had consumed his soul. Samuel picked up his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd use, that of his pastor at the church he attended more for appearances than for faith. Pastor Wilson, this is Samuel Blackwood. I need to talk to someone. I've done something terrible and I don't know where to turn. The voice on the other end of the line was gentle, non-judgmental. I'm here, Samuel. Come to church right now if you can. Some stains are too big to deal with alone. Samuel felt tears, the first in years, burning in his eyes. Yes, he whispered. Yes, I know that now. He hung up, grabbed his car keys, and headed out into the night, leaving behind the empty mansion, the status symbols, the carefully constructed facade. For the first time in years, Samuel Blackwood was walking toward the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The invisible stain had finally become visible, and maybe, just maybe, this was the first step in cleaning it up. The following months were a blur of public humiliation. His face was on the front pages of newspapers, no longer as an example of success, but as a symbol of greed and corruption. "Fraudulent CEO steals millions," screamed the headlines. The trial was swift and ruthless. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Samuel was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The sentence, however, was only the beginning of his punishment. His wife, Catherine, filed for divorce a week after his conviction. His children, now teenagers, refused to visit him. His friends disappeared. His fortune was confiscated to pay restitution. In just 6 months, Samuel Blackwood lost everything he had built in 2 decades. The medium-security federal prison where Samuel was sent was in the Arizona desert, a place where the sun punished mercilessly during the day and the biting cold penetrated to the bone at night. A place where men like him, white-collar men who had fallen from grace, were forced to face the consequences of their choices. Samuel shared a small cell with a man named Marcus, a former accountant convicted of tax fraud. Marcus was a quiet man who spent most of his time reading old books he could get in the prison library. "You get used to it," Marcus told Samuel on his first day, not with the prison itself, but with the idea that his old life is over. The faster you accept that, the easier it will be. But Samuel did not want to accept. He would spend sleepless nights, tossing and turning in his narrow bunk, reliving his previous life. The soft touch of Egyptian cotton sheets, the taste of $500 wine a bottle, the sound of his children's laughter echoing through the halls of his mansion. During the day, he worked in the prison laundry. His hands, once manicured and smooth, now rough and cracked by industrial detergent. He would observe the stains on the other. Prisoners' clothes, rubbing them hard, as if he could somehow wipe away his own invisible stains. It was in the laundry room that Samuel met Old Johnson. Old Johnson was a legend in prison. No one knew his age for sure. Some said 70, others swore he was over 80. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, his skin dark as polished mahogany, his eyes clear and piercing as if they could see through the prison walls. Johnson had worked in the laundry longer than anyone could remember. He knew all the tricks to remove the most stubborn stains: blood, grease, permanent paint. "There is no stain that cannot be removed," he used to say. "It's just a matter of finding the right cleaner." At first, Samuel avoided the old man. There was something in Johnson's eyes that made him feel uncomfortable, as if the man could see all the stains on his soul. But one day, after 3 months in prison, Samuel was having difficulty with a particularly stubborn stain on a uniform. "You're rubbing too hard," Johnson said, quietly approaching. "Sometimes the force just makes the stain penetrate deeper into the fabric." Samuel looked at the old man with irritation. "And what do you suggest?" Johnson smiled, revealing surprisingly white and perfect teeth. "Let it soak. Give the cleaner time to do his job." He took the uniform from Samuel's hands, dipped it in a solution he had prepared, and set it aside. "Let's talk while we wait," Johnson said, sitting on a nearby bench. Reluctantly, Samuel sat down next to him. "What's your crime, son?" asked Johnson. "Corporate fraud," Samuel replied dryly. "I embezzled money from my company." Johnson nodded, without judgment in his eyes. "And why did you do that?" The question took Samuel by surprise. No one had asked him this before. Not the police, not the prosecutors, not even his own lawyer. Everyone assumed that the answer was obvious. Greed. I don't know," Samuel stammered. "It started small, a little here, a little there. I always told myself that I would give it back. But then the stain grew," Johnson added. "And before you knew it, it had spread throughout your entire life." Samuel looked at the old man in astonishment. "How do you know that?" Johnson smiled again. "Son, do you think you're the first stained man I've ever met? This prison is full of them. In fact, the whole world is. He got up, went to the tank where he had left the uniform to soak and removed it. The stain had completely disappeared. See? There is no stain that cannot be removed. Over the next few weeks, Samuel began to spend more time with the elder Johnson. There was something comforting about the man's presence, a calmness that Samuel could not find anywhere else in prison. One day, after his shift at the laundry, Johnson invited Samuel to accompany him to the prison library. "I'm not very interested in reading," Samuel said. "I'm not inviting you to read it," Johnson replied. "I'm inviting you to find answers." The prison library was a small, dimly lit place with metal bookshelves filled with books worn out by use. Johnson led Samuel to a secluded corner where there was a table with an open Bible. Samuel rolled his eyes. "If you're going to try to convert me, Johnson, you're wasting your time. I've been to church my whole life. What good was it?" Johnson laughed, a deep, melodic sound that echoed between the bookshelves. "Going to church doesn't make you a Christian, just like going to a garage doesn't make you a car." He pointed to the open Bible. "Do you know Psalm 50? Samuel shook his head. Johnson began to recite, his voice taking on an almost musical quality. "Listen, my people, and I will speak. O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God thy God. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills." He looked at Samuel. "Do you know what that means? That God owns everything?" ventured Samuel. "It means that nothing you had was really yours," Johnson said. "The house, the car, the money, everything belongs to God. You were just an administrator, and you betrayed that trust." The words hit Samuel like a punch in the stomach. He had never thought that way. "But there's more," Johnson continued, turning the pages of the Bible until he reached the book of Revelation. Here, chapter 1, verse 5. "And from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the prince of the kings of the earth, to him who loves us, and by his blood has freed us from our sins." Johnson closed the Bible and looked straight into Samuel's eyes. "There is a source, son, a source that can cleanse even the deepest stains of your soul." 6 months after his arrival in prison, Samuel received his first letter. The envelope had the elegant handwriting of Catherine, his ex-wife. For a moment, he hesitated to open it, fearing what he might find inside. Finally, with trembling hands, he tore up the envelope. "Samuel," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds him well, considering the circumstances. The lawyers finalized the divorce papers last week. I am writing to inform you that I am moving with the children to Boston. I was offered a job there, and I think it will be good for all of us to have a fresh start, away from the memories and shame that his name now carries in Los Angeles. Doctors diagnosed Emily with severe anxiety. She has nightmares almost every night. Michael has stopped playing basketball and barely leaves the room. Both are in therapy. The therapist says that they are dealing with feelings of abandonment and betrayal. I'm not writing this to make you feel worse, Samuel. I'm writing because you need to understand the real consequences of your actions. It wasn't just money you stole. You stole your children's childhood. You stole their trust in the world. You stole their security. I don't know if they'll ever be ready to see him again. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to forgive him, but I'm trying not to hate him for their sake and for my own sake. Goodbye, Samuel. I hope you find a way to make peace with what you've done. Catherine. Samuel dropped the letter on the floor of the cell. His whole body trembled. He felt a physical pain, as if someone had stuck a knife in his chest and was slowly spinning it. He had lost everything, absolutely everything. That night, for the first time since he was a child, Samuel Blackwood cried himself to sleep. Dawn came as a cruel intrusion for Samuel Blackwood. The first rays of sunlight penetrated through the cracks of the automatic shutters that had not closed completely, creating golden stripes on the gray concrete of the cell. He was lying in his lower bunk, his eyes fixed on the rusty springs of the bed above, where Marcus was snoring softly. The thin mattress, covered in a rough industrial cotton sheet that smelled of cheap bleach, pressed painfully against her back, accustomed to the ergonomic comfort of a $10,000 Tempur-Pedic. 7 days. Just 7 days since FBI agents had walked into his office at Blackwood Technologies, brandishing a warrant and loudly announcing, for all employees to hear, that Samuel Blackwood was being investigated for corporate fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. 7 days since he had been handcuffed and escorted out of the building that bore his name, passing by the shocked faces of people who, until that moment, had admired, respected, envied him. 7 days since his life had completely collapsed. Catherine's letter had arrived yesterday. Samuel had read it so many times that he had practically memorized it, each word etched in his mind as if it had been carved with a knife. Samuel, the letter began, without dear or any other term of affection. I hope this letter finds him well, considering the circumstances. The lawyers finalized the divorce papers last week. I am writing to inform you that I am moving with the children to Boston. I've been offered a job at the Massachusetts Contemporary Art Foundation, and I think it's going to be good for all of us to have a fresh start, away from the memories and shame that your name now carries in Los Angeles. The mansion in Malibu is being put up for sale, as directed by the lawyers. Most of the assets will be liquidated to pay the indemnities and fines. I kept only a few family mementos and personal items for the kids. Doctors diagnosed Emily with severe anxiety and panic disorder. She has nightmares almost every night, wakes up screaming her name. She had to suspend her enrollment at Stanford after a group of students, children of investors you harmed, organized a protest against her on campus. She has changed her hair color and is considering changing her last name. Michael has stopped playing basketball and barely leaves his room. His coach told me that he was being bullied constantly, with the other boys calling him a son of a thief. Last week, he was involved in a violent altercation when someone wrote, "Blackwood is a criminal," on his locker. He was suspended for 3 days. Both are in intensive care. Dr. Levinson, a trauma expert who is working with them, says they are dealing with deep feelings of abandonment, betrayal, and shame. Emily wonders if everything you ever told her was a lie. Michael wonders if he'll end up like you. I'm not writing this to make you feel worse, Samuel. I'm writing because you need to understand the real consequences of your actions. It wasn't just money you stole. You stole your children's childhood. You stole their trust in the world. You stole their security. You stole the future we had planned together. I don't know if they'll ever be ready to see him again. Emily says she doesn't want to. Michael doesn't say anything when his name is mentioned. He just leaves the room. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to forgive him, but I'm trying not to hate him, for their sake and for my own sake. Goodbye, Samuel. I hope you find a way to make peace with what you've done. Catherine. Samuel dropped the letter on the floor of the cell. His entire body trembled, not from cold, though the prison's industrial air conditioning kept the temperature uncomfortably low, but from a physical pain that seemed to emanate from the center of his being. It was as if someone had stuck a knife in his chest and was slowly spinning it, tearing tissues, cutting arteries, piercing vital organs. He had lost everything, absolutely everything. The company he had built from scratch, now in free fall on the stock market, its market value reduced to less than 1/10 of what it was before the scandal. The fortune he had accumulated, much of it confiscated by the government, the rest going to lawyers and compensation. The reputation he had so carefully cultivated, now in tatters, his name synonymous with greed and fraud. The family he loved, despite all his flaws, now shattered, his children bearing scars that might never fully heal. And for what? For $42 million in an offshore account that he would never get to touch? For the momentary thrill of cheating the system? To fill a void that he now realized could never be filled with money or power? That night, for the first time since he was a child, Samuel Blackwood cried himself to sleep. They were not silent, restrained tears, the kind he had sometimes shed during emotional films or at his father's funeral. They were violent, primal sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He wept for all that he had lost, for all that he had thrown away, for all the people he had hurt. Marcus, his cellmate, said nothing. He just climbed down from his bunk, placed a hesitant hand on Samuel's shoulder for a moment, and then returned to his own bed. giving him as much privacy as possible in a space of 2.5 by 3 meters. Catherine's letter triggered something in Samuel. For the next few days, he barely left his cell, except to go to work in the prison laundry. An irony that didn't escape him, the man, who once wore $8,000 Brioni suits, now folded orange uniforms, stained with sweat and blood. He didn't eat, pushing the tasteless institutional food around the plastic tray before throwing it away, largely untouched. He didn't talk to anyone, not even Johnson, the old inmate at the laundromat who had tried to strike up a conversation a few times. He did not participate in the recreational activities in the courtyard, preferring to be alone in his cell, staring at the concrete wall as if he could find answers in its cracks and damp stains. Guilt consumed him inside like a corrosive acid, dissolving any remnant of self-esteem or hope he might still have. He began to have vivid nightmares that woke him up several times a night, drenched in cold sweat. He saw the faces of his children, pale and accusing. He saw the investors he had cheated, people who had lost their life savings because of his greed, retirees who now could not afford medical treatment, parents who could no longer send their children to college, families who had lost their homes. Saw Catherine turning his back on him and disappearing into the darkness, taking Emily and Michael with him. In his darkest moments, Samuel considered suicide. It wouldn't be difficult in prison. A makeshift rope with sheets, an unsupervised moment. It would be a way out, an end to the constant torture of his thoughts. But something stopped him. Not courage to live, but cowardice to die? Or perhaps a faint thread of hope that somehow he could one day repair at least a fraction of the damage he had caused. A week after receiving the letter, Samuel was in the prison yard during the recreation period. It was a hot day, the Arizona sun burning mercilessly, the air dry as sandpaper in the lungs. The courtyard was a large concrete rectangle surrounded by barbed wire fences and watchtowers, with a few worn metal benches and rudimentary exercise equipment. A group of inmates played basketball on a court with almost erased markings and hoops without nets. Others lifted makeshift weights, sporting tattoos and muscles developed during long hours of prison boredom. Samuel sat alone on a remote bench, staring blankly at the cracked concrete floor, his shoulders hunched under the unseen weight of his guilt. His orange uniform, already too big for his body when he arrived, now hung loosely from his emaciated body. His beard, which he had never before grown for more than a day, was disheveled and speckled with gray. His eyes, once lively and penetrating, were now dull and sunk into deep, dark circles. That's when he heard the commotion. A group of prisoners had surrounded a younger man in a corner of the courtyard. Samuel recognized the young man. He was a new inmate, newly arrived, convicted of credit card fraud. No more than 22 or 23 years old, looking like a college student and clearly terrified. The other prisoners, 5 larger, older, and noticeably more dangerous men, were pushing the young man, mocking him, calling him rich and daddy's boy. Samuel saw one of them pull out a makeshift blade, probably a molten toothbrush sharpened against the concrete, a shank in prison parlance. Something awoke within Samuel. Not conscious reasoning, not calculating risks and benefits as he had done all his adult life, but a primitive, visceral impulse. Without thinking, he stood up and walked towards the group. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice hoarse from little use. "Leave him alone!" The prisoners turned to him in surprise. The leader of the group, a huge man named Diaz with tattoos covering his arms and a scar that cut his face from his left eye to his chin, stepped forward. Samuel knew him by sight and by reputation, convicted of second-degree murder, serving 25 years, with connections to a Phoenix street gang. "That's none of your business, Blackwood," Diaz said, his voice a low growl. "Go back to your corner before I decide you need a lesson, too." Samuel did not back down. Something had broken inside him. Fear, perhaps, or the instinct for self-preservation. Or maybe it was just that, having lost everything, he had nothing left to lose. 5 against 1 doesn't seem fair to me, Samuel said, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. "If you have any problem with him, solve it as men, not as cowards." A murmur ran through the courtyard. Other inmates had stopped what they were doing to observe the confrontation. It wasn't every day that someone challenged Diaz, especially not a white-collar inmate like Blackwood. Diaz laughed, a harsh and humorless sound. Look who talks about cowardice. The guy who stole millions hiding behind a computer. The guy who destroyed lives without ever looking his victims in the eye. The words hit Samuel like a slap, but he kept his posture. "You're right," he said, surprising Diaz. "I was a coward. I stole from people who trusted me. I destroyed lives, including those of my own family, and I'm going to pay for it for the rest of my life." He stepped forward, now less than a meter from Diaz. "But at least I'm facing the consequences of my actions. What you're doing now is just perpetuating the cycle of violence that probably brought you here in the first place." The courtyard fell silent. The guards, noticing the tension, began to approach, hands on stun guns, ready to intervene at the first sign of violence. Diaz stared at Samuel for a long moment, his dark eyes studying the older man, as if seeing him for the first time. Then, to everyone's surprise, including Samuel, he put the improvised blade in the elastic of his pants. "You have courage, Blackwood," Diaz said finally. "Stupid, but brave." He gestured to the others and the group dispersed, throwing menacing glances at the young inmate, but leaving him unharmed. The young man looked at Samuel with gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, man," he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Probably not." "Good," Samuel replied dryly. "What's your name?" "Jason. Jason Reeves." "Well, Jason, a piece of advice. Keep your head down. Find a group to join with, preferably in the library or chapel, not in the courtyard. And never, ever show fear. They sniff it out like sharks sniff blood." Jason nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. I heard about you. You're the Blackwood Technologies guy, right?" Samuel felt a pang of shame, but nodded. "Yes, that's me. The great Samuel Blackwood reduced to that." He made a gesture encompassing his orange uniform and the prison yard. "My father lost almost everything investing in his company," Jason said, and for a moment Samuel thought the young man was going to attack him. But instead, Jason continued. "He was devastated. He started drinking. He lost his job. That's why I started with the fraudulent credit cards, to help pay the bills." The confession hit Samuel like a punch in the stomach. Another life he had helped ruin, another domino effect of his greed that stretched far beyond what he had ever imagined. "I'm sorry," Samuel said, the words sounding utterly inappropriate. "I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm really sorry." Jason shrugged. "You're not the only one to blame. I made my own choices. Stupid as you told the big guy." A whistle sounded, signaling the end of the recreation period. The inmates began to form lines to return to the cell blocks. "Thank you again," Jason said, holding out his hand. Samuel squeezed it, noting how young he was, how a whole life was still ahead of this boy, despite the mistake that had brought him to prison. "Take care, Jason." That night, as Samuel lay in his cell, he realized that he had touched rock bottom. He had lost everything: his family, his wealth, his freedom, his reputation. There was nothing left to lose. And that's when he had an epiphany. When you hit rock bottom, the only possible direction is up. For the first time in weeks, Samuel felt something other than overwhelming: guilt and despair. It wasn't exactly hope. It was too early for that. But perhaps the first glimpse of the possibility of redemption. Not a redemption that would erase his crimes or restore what he had lost, but one that would allow him in some way to do something good with the rest of his life. He thought of young Jason, whose father had been one of his countless anonymous victims. He thought of Emily and Michael, carrying the shame of his name. He thought of Catherine, rebuilding her life away from him. He thought of the thousands of investors who had trusted him, many of whom had lost their life savings. There was no way to undo the damage, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to start compensating for it. Not with money, that was lost, but with something more. The next morning, he looked for Johnson in the laundry room. The old man was sorting through sheets, his wrinkled hands moving with the efficiency of decades of practice. His clear eyes lit up when he saw Samuel approaching. "Good morning, son," Johnson said. his deep melodic voice contrasting with the sterile environment of the laundry. "I was wondering when you would talk again." Samuel felt ashamed for having ignored the old man in recent weeks. "Sorry about that. I was dealing with some things." Johnson nodded, understanding. Rock Bottom is a lonely place. "Believe me, I know." Samuel took a sheet and began to fold it, working alongside the old man. "You mentioned a source," he said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "A fountain that can clean any stain. I want to know more about her." Johnson smiled, his eyes shining with a light that seemed to come from within, a light that contrasted dramatically with the cold, impersonal fluorescence of the prison laundry. "Finally, son. Finally, you're ready." "Ready for what?" asked Samuel. "To start living for real," Johnson replied, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "To start cleaning those stains that no detergent can touch." Samuel felt something stirring inside him, not hope, not yet, but perhaps its precursor, possibility. The possibility that even here, even now, even after all he had done, there might be a way forward. A path not to recover what he had lost, but to find something new, something that was perhaps worth more than everything he had ever owned. "I am ready," Samuel said, and for the first time in a long time, his words were completely true. That afternoon in the prison cafeteria, Samuel sat next to Jason, the young man he had defended in the courtyard. The boy seemed surprised but grateful for the company. "How's your father now?" asked Samuel as he poked at what was supposed to be beef stew, but had more the appearance and consistency of dog food. Jason shrugged. "Better, I think. He got a new job. It doesn't pay as well as the old one, but it's something. My mother says he stopped drinking so much." "Does he know you're here?" "Yes. He's coming to visit me next month." Jason hesitated. He's not happy, obviously, but he said he understands why I did what I did. He said he loves me no matter what. Samuel felt a pang of envy. Would Emily or Michael be able to say the same about him someday? "You're lucky," Samuel said. "Not everyone has that kind of unconditional love." "Isn't your family coming to visit you?" asked Jason. Samuel shook his head. "My ex-wife is divorcing me. It took my children to the other side of the country. I doubt I'll ever see them again." Jason was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry. I deserved it," Samuel said. "I made terrible choices. I hurt a lot of people, including your father." "Look," Jason said uncomfortably, "I'm not saying what you did was right. It wasn't. But everyone makes mistakes, right? Some bigger than others, but still." Samuel studied the young man. There was an amazing wisdom in his words, a capacity for forgiveness that Samuel did not expect. "You know," Samuel said slowly, "before I came here, I had everything. Money, power, status. I thought that made me successful, but now I realize that I never understood what really matters." "And what is it?" asked Jason. Samuel thought for a moment. "Connections. Not the kind that get you a seat in first class or a table in the most exclusive restaurant in town. Real connections. With family, with friends, with something bigger than yourself." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "My father used to say something similar. First of all, you know, he said that real wealth is in relationships, not in bank accounts." "Your father seems like a wise man," Samuel said. "Wiser than I ever was." They ended their meal in contemplative silence. When they got up to return the trays, Samuel said, "There is a Bible study group that meets in the chapel on Wednesday evenings. I'm thinking of going. Do you want to come with me?" Jason looked surprised. "You don't look like the religious type." Samuel laughed, a sound rusted by disuse. "I'm not, or at least it wasn't. But I'm starting to think that maybe it's time to explore some new directions." "Why not?" said Jason with a shrug. "It's not like we have a lot of entertainment options around here." As they walked back to their respective cell blocks, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, a purpose. It wasn't as big or grand as the purposes it used to pursue, to dominate the market, to revolutionize technology, to accumulate wealth. It was small, humble, helping a young man navigate prison, exploring a faith he had ignored all his adult life, perhaps finding a way to begin to repair at least a fraction of the damage he had done. But it was a purpose, and for the first time since he had hit rock bottom, Samuel Blackwood felt that maybe, just maybe, he could begin to climb back to the surface. Samuel Blackwood had lost everything: his fortune, his family, his freedom. But as he hit rock bottom, he discovered a surprising truth. Sometimes, we have to lose everything to find what really matters. Now, in front of old Johnson in the prison laundry, Samuel was about to learn the secret of the spring that cleanses even the deepest stains of the soul. But the road to redemption is never easy. And what Samuel didn't know was that his journey was just beginning. What is this mysterious source Johnson mentions? How will Samuel be able to wipe away the stains from his soul? And will it be possible to regain what he lost? Don't miss the continuation of this exciting story in the next video. Samuel's journey from darkness to light is just beginning, and you won't want to miss a moment of this extraordinary transformation. Click on the link that is appearing on your screen now to continue following the source that cleans.